I just want to let you all know that I've got someone very special joining us today, and her name is Rika Whelan. You are going to be absolutely blown away by the information she's going to bring us today around, people, onboarding, workplace culture, dipping our toe into gossip, and we may even dive in a little deeper because it's such a fascinating subject. Are you ready to work less, stress less, and make more money? I bet you're tired of working really hard, putting in crazy hours, and still not getting the results you know you deserve. How about we swap constant overwhelm for ease and grace and take your business to the next level? Imagine having absolute certainty with every decision you make. There's a way you can achieve it all without losing yourself. I'm Deb Field, quick win coach, business boss, and keep it simple CEO. I've been successfully taking small, medium and large businesses to the next level for decades. Want to learn how? Go grab your favourite cuppa. I'm about to share powerful quick wins you can apply today. Let's create business magic with your heart at the centre of everything you do. So just a little bit about Rika before we start. She's a seasoned workplace culture coach. She's had decades of experience in various leadership roles, which is awesome. And she's had a passion for equipping leaders to support and lead their teams well, and for everyone to experience a positive workplace culture and feel psychologically safe at work, which is really high on agendas these days. And I was only speaking with someone recently, and it's such a buzzword, but it's got so much substance underneath. So I'm really excited to talk and dip our toe into that as well. So Rika's currently in her last stretches of her MBA, woohoo you, and holds an executive coaching certification as well as a certificate in training and assessment. So she has been around the block. So I'd like to welcome Rika to the show today. And is there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners before we kick off this amazing interview?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on the show. I feel really privileged to be able to share the knowledge that I've gained over, like you mentioned, the last couple of decades. And yeah, I think what I'd like to share just additionally is, who I am, and why I have this passion for workplace culture. So my background basically is in education, and I've experienced the worst of the worst when it comes to workplace gossip and bad workplace cultures. But along with that, bad leaders. I think, when the reason why I have such a passion for leadership now is because I have experienced the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to leadership. And to be honest, I'm not perfect either. So I have made some serious big mistakes in leadership in the past. And now I'm on a mission to equip leaders to not make the same mistakes. I understand that we learn from our mistakes, but if you can avoid some crucial mistakes in your leadership and not hurt people, in the back end of that, I think that's very crucial, because as human beings, we do get hurt, especially by people in authority and their actions. And I don't think as leaders we realize what a crucial role we play in our employees' lives, and especially employees who are brand new to the workforce. Those young people who look up to us as figures of authority, we've got such a crucial role. So yes, I've been in various leadership roles, and I've successfully eradicated workplace gossip. Yay! In a workplace that I was working at before. And a lot of people say to me that it's not possible to get rid of gossip altogether. Well, I'm here to bust that myth. It's definitely possible. And so, yeah, coming from that back end as well and knowing what's possible, I've just got this amazing passion for leaders, because leadership is hard. It's definitely not an easy road.
You're right on there. It's definitely not an easy road. And it's something that, some can do it innately, and maybe they've been doing it throughout their lives in different roles as maybe parents or, coaching kids with soccer or some sort of other leadership roles. But most don't have an innate skill in that space. And so I guess my question to you is, what makes a good leader, especially when you're driving workplace culture and psychological safety?
I think it is so true what you say. We don't innately know how to be good leaders. And so there's a lot of leadership training out there that you can go and attend. But even a lot of those leadership trainings can be overrated, because you go to a seminar to go and learn about leadership. You come back and then you apply what you've learned. but it's the application of those leadership principles that where things get sticky and where it gets really, really tough. Why? Because you're working with human behavior. And the one thing that's most unpredictable in this world is human behavior. One person can act one way today, and tomorrow they'll act in a completely opposite way, and you might not understand why. So I think for me, good leadership is all about people. If you can prioritize relationships with your employees above and beyond the KPIs, above and beyond the financial gain for the organization, which I understand. If we're a for-profit business, we are chasing profit. But what helps us to chase those profits are our employees. And so if we're putting our employees, their mental well-being, their physical well-being, and their right to switch off, which is a new law in Australia. That's amazing. So they have a right not to answer questions from their boss on a weekend, which is a brand new law that's been introduced here, which is so super cool. And it's just this way of to say that, okay, I'm going to prioritize my employees. I'm not going to let the organization prioritize it for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think leadership is that. It is being for your people and building relationships with them. I understand from a leadership perspective that if you've got 50 employees, or you even got if you're in a big organization, 100 employees, it can be tricky to build relationships with them. But as the CEO then, or as the head of department, it is your role and it is your job to make sure that you know who works for you, and that you maybe have got key people amongst those 100 people that's reporting back to you to say, and giving you updates on those people, so that you can just flick a quick email and say, let's use Sue as an example. Hey, Sue, I hear that you're going through a really tough time. Or, hey, Sue, I'm sorry to hear that your mum passed away. Things like that can make a big, big, big difference with workplace culture, because your employees will say, oh, wow, I'm feeling seen and heard, and my problems actually matter.
Oh, that's such a great point. I remember when my dad passed in 2020, I took some time off, and the chief people officer called me to say, look, really sorry to hear. And it was just a lovely reflection of their capabilities and their intention as a leader. And I think when we bring that through, we actually care. Things tend to work out. You can always work things out if things go awry. If you're coming from that solid foundation of looking after you, developing you, making sure that your role is really clear, and that you have confidence in doing that role, and you're psychologically safe in that role. I think that's a critical part of our jobs as leaders, to engage and bring them through safely, and enable them to be their best. I mean, that's the greatest thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we do know, and I know from our conversations, and also, reflecting, because we've talked about this a bit, and it's just an awesome subject, reflecting on it in my past and how we gossip, deal with gossip, our opinion of gossip, and the impacts of gossip. And I'd really be interested in what you've been learning, because this is a field that you are just an incredible expert in, and I know you've got gold to share with our listeners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gossip is an interesting topic, because as I've been delving deeper into the topic, I've come to learn that it is a bigger problem amongst people and employees and leaders, let me be more specific, than what they would even like to realize. So I initially, when I set out on my research, talking to people, I was initially focusing on employees being the gossipers. But in my research, a lot of the employees came back to me and said, but it's not only the employees that are the gossipers. It's actually, I don't gossip at all. I don't have an inkling to gossip at work, because I know how detrimental it is. However, my bosses do, and they are setting the pace of how the workplace culture is. And so it is interesting, because it's more than one person who would have said that to me. It's the leaders that are the problem, not necessarily the employees. I've spoken to multiple HR managers as well, who concur with me that sometimes they struggle more with the leaders gossiping or setting the pace for a bad workplace culture than the employees themselves. And so it was an interesting concept to me, again, how leadership really shapes the workplace culture and what that will look like. So if you're, as a leader, gossiping about your employees? Well, because gossip can take many different forms as well. This is something that many people have probed me on, but what is gossip, and what would you define gossip as? And so I think for me, gossip, my definition, it's not a dictionary definition, but for me, it is when you talk about someone else. That's it. When you talk about someone else. And look, I understand that we talk about people positively in the workplace, because especially if you want to say, oh, did you hear? Again, I'll use Sue. Did you hear Sue's good news? Oh, it's so great. But the issue with that is that as soon as we start talking about people in a positive light, which is fine, like I don't want to say we can't talk about people at all. All that I'm saying is, if you can talk about people in a positive manner, how easy would it be for you to switch to talking about them in a negative manner? Because you're already talking about them. So I think that, yes, we work with human beings. We have different human behaviors that we have to deal with, but we have to be mindful that all of our conversation does not just constantly surround other people. So a recent study that was done in America shows that 87% of people have acknowledged that they gossip at work. And so 53 minutes per day at work is spent on gossiping. So that was a recent study done in America. And I find it so detrimental that 53 minutes a day, what a lack of productive work. It is just such a waste of an employee's resources, a waste of time. Because yes, it's 53 minutes that could have been spent on reaching KPIs, on, speaking to customers and so forth. So and I understand, again, it's not only about those KPIs and about being for profit, but if we're running a business, that's exactly what it's about. So yeah, gossip is an interesting one, but I can firmly say that nearly everyone I speak to says that, yes, I have, or I have in the past gossiped, or I still gossip. It is 100% an issue that is being basically taken as the norm. A lot of people see it as a norm in the workplace. And some HR managers who I've spoken to said, well, you just have to manage it successfully. You absolutely cannot get rid of it, but you have to manage it successfully.
Like, since we've spoken about culture over the last many years, it's really been high on my radar to keep an eye out for it and listen to how it shows up. And you're right. It's kind of like we start talking about one thing and then it leads to another thing, and then, oh, and then it sort of hops over the fence, really. There's a line where it shifts. And suddenly there's a conversation about someone that's not in a positive light, and they're not in the room. And I remember I shared this with you one time where I had that experience myself in a meeting room with 3 other people, and that sort of that little kind of approach started to happen, and whoop, over the fence they went. And I actually asked them to hold that right there. Do you mind us getting back to the subject? I'd rather not talk about that person because they're just not here, and it's just not right that we do that. And I kind of put a stop to it really quickly. It didn't happen again in that meeting, nor should it really. But it made me really conscious of how important that is. I would love someone to be there in a room when I'm being spoken about, possibly in a negative way, without my, having the ability to answer any questions or to reflect the truth or whatever it needs to be. I would love someone in that room to support me and not have that go on. So it's a funny thing, gossip, isn't it? I know we've talked about the nuances. Before we dive into how you solved it, because we'll do that definitely, because I know the listeners are like, got their ears on that one. Let's talk about the nuances of gossip. Let's go lean into that one.
So I think when it comes to gossip, again, it's this question of, but what is gossip really? Was the biggest question that came out when I was doing a bit of market research. And so apologies. When I was, speaking about my opinion of gossip, because the one thing that came up a lot is just when you're venting at work. So, venting at work in comparison to gossip, is there a big difference between the two? And even a big, leadership guru like Simon Sinek says that you should be allowed to vent at work, but you should be careful that venting does not turn into gossiping. I fully disagree with that, because I feel like if you're going to start sharing your frustrations or you're venting about someone at work, again, it's just so quick to jump over the fence. It's so quick to then, how will you ever know where's the boundary if you are
Mm.
constantly talking about people at work? The other thing is what's called like office chatter or office, just chit chat. Are you allowed to chit chat? Was one of the questions I had once. And yes, of course, you're allowed to chit chat, but not about people. So make sure that the culture is not that we are constantly talking about other people. You can share about yourself. So rather make that a habit to share about your weekend and what you've been up to, and but not about other people. So if you've heard that somebody else had a really bad weekend, don't share their news with your colleague. Wait for them to share their news. It's
Mm.
that age-old thing of don't share it if it's not your news, basically. There is a saying, but I can't recall what it is now. But yeah, just don't share it if it's not your news. Share your own news.
Yeah.
The other thing as well, what people don't often realize can be constituted as gossip is when you are, for example, in a meeting, let's say it's leader to leader, and you are talking about your employees. Leaders often feel that it's their right to talk about employees because, I'm their line manager, I can talk about them. But when it constantly happens and everybody's constantly being negative in that meeting about those employees, that's when it becomes toxic. And
Mm.
that's when gossip becomes the norm, because you think talking about those employees, about constantly negatively about their performance, constantly negatively about their personal circumstances that's affecting the workplace or whatever, then that can turn into toxic leadership meetings. So we definitely want to avoid those toxic leadership meetings. And I've got an example of that. So, for example, I had a leadership team. We were about 8 people on the team, and I didn't pick it up straight away. I'll be the first one to put my hand up to say that I did not realize that those meetings had become toxic. It was one of my other leadership team members that came to me one day and said, Rika, these leadership meetings that we're having every fortnight, they've become quite negative. Have you noticed? And I said, oh, no, I actually haven't. Okay, let's hold that thought. Let's have our leadership meeting this coming fortnight, and let's see. And I left it just at that. And yes, I picked it up. Then I picked it up immediately. And this is what happens to us is we get into this rut or the cycle of how we do our meetings, and then we don't pick up when things become negative. Why? Because it's become the norm.
Mm.
So yeah.
It's an interesting thing. And I think as leaders, if we're equipped with knowing what it looks like, knowing what it smells like, what it tastes like, we can stop it really quickly in ourselves and demonstrate that in front of others and actually lead the way. I think it's such a great thing to create that psychological safety that we're looking for these days. There's so much we've had a bit of rocky times in the last many years with COVID and working remotely or working at home, and going back in the office, and do I feel safe? In all kinds of ways. We're on heightened alert to things that can sort of tip us over that anxiety edge, or that we've got a bit of an unstable platform, and we're seeing the rise in anxiety and depressions and things like that too. And so the welcoming that we can provide and the safety we can provide and the culture of, you're loved and cared for here, that's a cool thing. I'm just not sure if that's the typical message leaders are getting these days. What's your opinion on that?
Mm. Absolutely. So after COVID-19, we saw the Great Resignation. And so the rise of the Great Resignation was people realizing that they were not happy in their workplaces, and they do not have to tolerate any toxic behavior or a lack of support or a lack of validation any longer. And so that's what then saw us, people resigning in droves, changing careers, and, and just changing their life. And, this word of prioritize and, getting perspective. That was the favorite word my employees used with me at that point in time is, I've gained perspective and this is just not what I want to do.
Mm.
And so after the Great Resignation, what we saw was quiet quitting. And so after people realized that, okay, well, I can't afford to quit my job for financial reasons. So I'm just going to go to work. I'm going to do the absolute bare minimum of what's expected to me so that I'm not performance managed, but I'm just not going to do anything extra. And so, this law that just came out in Australia about being able to disconnect from work on weekends and after a certain time at night, That article said that the average Australian works 6 weeks above and beyond what they are expected to work each year, because so in hours, I don't know how many hours that is, but if you add that up, that's a lot of hours they're spending outside of work doing additional work because they're so passionate about their jobs, or because that's the expectation. So I don't even want to know what that number in America is, but that's the point, is that we're doing all of this extra work when we're passionate about our job. So the quiet quitting phase saw that people are not doing that anymore, which meant that a lot of businesses started suffering as a result of quiet quitting, because now all of a sudden you don't have people doing all this extra work anymore. And so that's where psychological safety comes in, because now people are making a decision that if I do not feel mentally safe at work, if I'm not going to be supported, then I'm going to quit and I'm going to leave. So that will lead to high staff turnover. And you will have, you are going to waste a lot of money on training and onboarding if you don't do it right from the start, and if you don't focus on the employee experience. So it's all about employee experience. Okay. So COVID-19 put a big spanner in the works for a lot of organizations who were not focused on their employees. And so, now we're seeing the fact that people want to have a sense of belonging at work. They don't just want to come to work. They want to feel a sense of belonging. They want to feel that they're recognized for the work that they're doing. Even if it's just basic work that's literally written on your contract, they want to be recognized for it. And that's also generation Z coming through now, and then generation Alpha, which is our next generation coming through, because we have to recognize that it's a generational thing as well. Generation Z is this generation that's coming into the workforce now and have been in the workforce for a little while. They are part of the participation medal generation. So it's not just about I'm getting recognized for good work. No, I want to get recognized for participating in my work. So participation medal, and it's that thing. So, if you're employing younger people, you have to realize that this generation is different, and that you can't just recognize them if they're doing well. You have to recognize them just on their everyday work.
For showing up even?
Yeah, just for showing up. No, because there's a lot of people who are not showing up for work.
Yeah,
They'd rather just call in sick and have a Netflix, sit on the couch with my hot chocolate day.
Yeah. So the old supply and demand and desire has changed.
Completely.
Wow, that's a really interesting thing. I'll have to have a chat to my daughter who's 21 and see what she's thinking about, recognition and support at work, and how she feels about diving in. It's a good one, Rika. I hadn't even thought about that. Okay, so let's talk about the things that you've learned as a leader that has removed gossip from the workplace. How did you do it? What did you learn? And what can we share with our listeners so they can start to implement those things in their businesses?
So I think the big thing that I've learned as a leader is that speak up about those things, because sometimes as leaders, we tend to sit back, we tend to take the back seat. We don't tend to go into the driver's seat. And that is because we've got a fear of people's reaction. So when we speak up to people, we fear their reaction. We fear how they're going to react. Are they going to get angry at us? Are they going to scream at us? Are they going to storm off? We just don't know. So because again, it's people behavior, and it's the most unpredictable thing in this whole world. And so as leaders, we really need to learn to step up to the plate and speak up. That's the one thing I've learned over my time. I was scared to speak up. Believe me, I was. But if it wasn't for the fact that I took up my courage, put my big old panties on, if I can say that.
Absolutely.
Then I would never have been successful in that. And so, yes, every single time I did have to have a difficult conversation, I had to take a deep, deep, deep breath. I had to prepare very well for those meetings, because I knew that people would react in a certain way, but I could control my emotions. I could control how I prepared for that meeting, and I could counter their reaction. So I prepared maybe 5 different scenarios of how they would react if I speak to them. And one of those scenarios would be they took it really well. great. And for other scenarios of not taking it very well, because then I could literally take a pause, look at my notes, and then react appropriately. Because when we're in a difficult conversation or in a difficult situation where we have to act immediately, the reptile brain takes over. And when that happens to us, we either have fight, flight, or freeze. And so as leaders, we have to learn to master this fight, flight, or freeze, because we need to know when is the appropriate time to exit this conversation. When is the appropriate time to just defend what you were saying or defend the other person? That's the fighting part. Or what do we have to say in return? Because quite often in this one, we say the wrong thing. We tend to say the wrong thing. Hence the reason why I always prepare really, really well. And then in terms of freeze, we need to know when is an appropriate time to just not say anything. Okay. And that can be really tough. So that was one thing that I learned in terms of leadership, is just stepping up to the plate and saying and speaking up about gossip. So what I did, it was a year-long process. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say it took me 6 weeks or even 6 days. No, it took me a year. Because why? We're dealing with human behavior. And for us as humans to change our behavior, we need to create new habits. To create a new habit, you need to do it 21 days repetitively for 21 days for it to actually be able to stick just for 5 days. Okay. Because after 5 days, or I think it's 7 days, maybe even, then you can lose that habit again. So we have to repeat, rinse and repeat the whole time. So that's why it took me a long time to do it, but also because I made a lot of mistakes.
Right.
And I made a lot of mistakes with people, so much that people resigned because they were so cross with me for making those mistakes. And I always thought to myself, it's so interesting that employees can make all the mistakes in the world. And as leaders, we just have to forgive them. But when us as leaders make mistakes, our employees will hold it against us. That was what I learned from that whole experience. But okay, we're in an authority position and people look up to us. So what I've done is after the fact, I'm going to run you through my framework of basically how I did that. The framework didn't exist back then, but I've now packaged it into a framework which I can teach other leaders easily. And so, yeah, I will also send through to you, Deb, for your listeners, just a PDF version of these.
Oh, that's lovely.
Steps. Well, then they can also click and download that. So the first thing I did was basically I reflected on the fact that there is this gossip, and I had to go and reflect on what there was and what there was not. Was there any paperwork or any documentation in place that basically mentioned to them that gossip was not tolerated? In terms of workplace culture, what was communicated to them? In terms of the onboarding, again, what was communicated to them? What expectations were communicated to them when it came to the onboarding process? Because when I came into that organization, it was a brand new department, but the department had already been there for about 3 months, so still very, very new. But gossip had already been rife, like in 3 months. So that means like something seriously has gone wrong. And so I had to really go and reflect on on everyone's behavior, what's going on. I had to go and identify who those problem people were and what those problem behaviors were. The next thing that I did was go and reset the expectations. So I've packaged it into a nice little respect framework, which is, I forgot to mention that before, but it's an acronym, respect. So R is for reflect and E is for expectation. So I sat with my leadership team. A leadership team didn't exist. I created a leadership team. So anybody who was in like a head of department or a leader overseeing other people under me, they formed part of a leadership team. And so I really empowered those leaders to feel like, okay, I've got the authority to also speak up, but I equipped them and I mentored them a lot. That's why we met up on a fortnightly basis. And we spoke about, again, all the problem behavior, hence the reason why it turned negatively quite quickly. But at that point in time, we had to discuss that negative behavior because they were helping me. They were my eyes and my ears. And so then we basically reset the expectations. So we came up with a no gossip policy, a no gossip pledge, and we wrote a couple of additional things, like we made posters that were going to go on the walls, like, typically in the bathrooms or in the toilets, give you something to read while you're sitting there. And a couple of additional resources that we came up with. And so then we called the whole team together. So I had a team of about 50 people. And over the 5 years that I oversaw that team, there was about 200 to 300. I don't know the exact number. I should have checked before I left there, but it's okay. Let's say about 250 people that I had over that 5-year period. The industry that I worked in is very prolific for high staff turnover. So that might sound terrible, but that industry really, people will just like that, they'll leave, go and search for $1 more per hour somewhere down the street, unfortunately. But so we just brought the whole team together, and we had what we called a panel discussion. So it was just all the leaders sitting in the front. We were talking about the new expectations. We gave the employees an opportunity to ask us questions about what these new expectations that we're talking about. I took on the role as the empathetic one. So I shared with them my concerns regarding the fact that there was so much gossip going on and the harm that it was doing to everybody's mental health. There was unfortunately, in that space, there was also bullying going on. So I did have to deal with that on a separate basis, because even that conversation, the bullying carried on. Gossip still carried on, and again throughout the year I kept people accountable, and then it kind of it finally went away when some people went away as well. But yeah, it was an interesting one, because people were really, really happy and excited after that team meeting about, okay, what's the future going to look like, and to implement that. But again, habits, so people fell into those bad habits again very, very quickly. Which basically brings me to my next point, which is S, so support. So what I did was I made sure that I supported those people who were doing really well. And I was really encouraging them to role model that good behavior and to just help everyone else who was struggling. And then on the other end, I also supported those people who were struggling. So through this whole process, I made sure that I documented everything. I documented dates of when I met with those people who struggled, those conversations that I held. And that was over about a 6-week, maybe even an 8-week period, where I gave them the opportunity to change those bad habits of gossiping. And I really supported them, because I felt that, okay, this is, again, a habit change, human behavior change. We need to support them, give them further training, offer them time on the floor to come and talk about, why they struggle with gossip. Because it came out that some people grew up in households where their parents were constantly bad-mouthing their colleagues. So if you grew up in a household where your parents are constantly complaining about their colleagues at work, well, then that becomes the norm for you. The other thing that came out is that the industry I worked in was very prolific for gossip. So when people came from their old workplaces to this workplace, gossip was already the norm for them. So they just brought that habit with them. So it's not just that people are bad people and that they want to gossip. It's about background and history and where does it all come from. So then the next one is performance management. So then I really moved to a more formal approach, where people were being performance managed for really not wanting to change, or being willing to change, or not having the ability to change. Because if you've gossiped for the past 20 years, or it's an ingrained habit in you, you're going to struggle to change. But there were also people who really just did not want to change. They had opinions about, well, I'm just passing on factual information to my colleagues, so I've got a right to gossip. And, that was just really not a people that I needed, were hanging around those people who were positive. And especially I had a lot of young people coming just out of university, just entering the workforce. And I didn't need these negative, energy vampires just really sucking the life out of these new people coming in. And so, performance manage them, work them out of the system. So, if you follow what is all the recommendations by Fair Work here in Australia, even if they've passed their probation period, you can 100% still fire them for doing the wrong thing. But you have to follow the process correctly. So, I know in America, you can easily fire someone for doing the wrong thing. There's only one state in America where you can't fire someone on the spot. All the other 49 states, you can literally fire someone on the spot for doing the wrong thing. So that's some of what my research also uncovered, which I found very interesting. In Australia, it's impossible to fire someone on the spot, so you have to have a lengthy process. Hence the reason why I had the 6 to 8 week support period. Then you've got another 6 week performance management period. If they're still struggling, you give them an additional 3 weeks. If they're still struggling after that, you give them a written warning or a final warning, first and final warning. And then if they still carry on after that period, which is there has then been a period of about 12 to 15 weeks, then you can dismiss them legally. So I did have one claim of unfair dismissal. Fair Work dismissed it because I could clearly show the paperwork of how that person did not want to support. So then the last 3 things I'll just mention very quickly so we can kind of wrap this piece up. And the next thing is your environment. So then you're going to really just sit with the whole team and decide what is this new environment that is going to contain no gossip. What is that going to look like? What fun things are we going to bring in to replace that negative behaviors? Because, to replace negative behaviors, we've got to have some incentives and some good things. So here you can think about your tangible things and your intangible things. Your tangible things might be a Friday coffee run, a coffee van every first Tuesday of the month, or a morning tea. So those are your kind of intangible reward stuff, and thinking about like certificates for gaining this amount of clients extra or whatever. So, those physical stuff. Your intangible things would be like having respect or, speaking respectfully to others. And what's that going to look like? And things that we're going to avoid and not do. And for example, somebody might find it really disrespectful if you walk into the room and you don't greet them or everyone. Whereas in another culture, you might not find that disrespectful at all. So talking about those things, what are the expectations? What can we do as intangible things that would make the workplace culture really great? C is for continuous accountability. So as a leader, it is your role to continuously keep your team accountable, because otherwise literally every single thing that you've done is going to fall flat on its head. Think about that cake rising in the oven, open it halfway and it's going to fall flat. So you need to see it all the way through, continuous accountability. And then T is for training programs. So make sure that you are offering your team continual training. It starts at the onboarding process. So any new person coming on board needs to be properly inducted into what this workplace culture looks like. What are the expectations here? What do we do and what don't we do? Then annual updates on that. And then training programs can also include things like your team building exercises, once a year, professional development days where, you're away from customers, you're away from clients, you're just spending time together as a team. So basically that's what I did. It took me a year, like I mentioned. It doesn't have to take you a year. It can take you shorter if you follow all those steps. But yeah, that's basically what I did, not in a nutshell.
Wow, that's incredible. And I know that's a really difficult line to take. It's a strong line. There's no question. To even, I mean, I remember when you first told me about putting a policy in, I was like, wow, that's like full on having to put a policy in to actually stop this behavior. Did people take it on board and then start to kind of ask people not to share when they started? Did it become part of the nature and the part of the culture?
Yeah, definitely. Look, there were some people who were difficult about all of this, but then there were really people who were so open to it because they'd also experienced bad workplace cultures before, especially in this industry where people do a lot of job hopping. They were just tired of walking out on a job because of bad workplace culture. So a lot of the people were really on board. I would say about 70% of the team were on board, solidly on board. Whereas about 30% of people were really just not on board, and they were finding it really, really tough. And yeah, they had to go. So I would say it was very tough at the beginning, and the accountability piece, which is what I stressed before, I just called people in immediately. I just called it as I see it, but also my leadership team played a big role in that, because they would let me know. They would alert me like, this has just happened. And I'm telling you, it sounds so silly, but I would just literally 5 minutes after an incident had happened, I would call them to my office and I would say, look, I'm aware that this just happened. You know what we've spoken about. can you share with me what's just happened? And then they would be very honest and say, yeah, okay, I had a relapse. I'm sorry about that. I'm finding it really tough.
Yeah.
Or other people would just be like, oh, you get your 1% of people who would fully deny it and say, no, that didn't just happen. They're lying. And I said, well, why would they lie about this? No, they're just trying to get me into trouble.
Mm.
I said, well, I trust my leadership team. I trust that they're not going to lie to me just to get you in trouble, but we need to get to the bottom of this. So I'm definitely going to write it down in the log of incidences. And if this is going to be a continual thing, it'll end up with a warning. So you've got a decision to make here, right, and now today, whether this behavior is going to continue or not. So a lot of what I did was human behavior. It was all focused on human behavior. If I could have gone and studied psychology just to understand human behavior better, I probably would have done it. But I'll tell you now, I failed psychology as part of my bachelor's degree, so I was not about to go and do that.
That's amazing. As I hear you, I can imagine some people would feel it's a really tough line to take. Take us to the year later and what it felt like, looked like, and what the culture was like 12 months later.
It was interesting because when those toxic people had left, I had onboarded a lot of new people. And so there was a lot of newbies. And it was the people who were left, who were the committed ones, were taking all these newbies under their wing. And they were really mentoring them. And every single time when something would happen, well, what I really, really, really liked is the fact that I didn't have to then pull people up anymore. Why? Because my leadership team did it, or people who were not even on the leadership team, they would speak to each other about it, and I would only hear about it after. And so an example that I have of this is at a, I don't know, it must have been like a fortnightly catch up or something we had with the leadership team. And so they were just catching me up on what was going on in their rooms. And they're like, oh, yeah, by the way, this person who's a newbie had started gossiping about somebody else. And I just kindly said, hey, actually, we don't do that here. And they said, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, Rika did mention that in the onboarding. I just had a moment of slip. But thank you very much. And they thanked them. And that was it. They never did it again. And so people actually became so comfortable in telling other people, hey, we don't do that here, that it became the norm to speak up because people were fighting for the positive workplace culture that we were having. They were not having, because you would sometimes even get agency relief staff in just as you must have someone on the call or, on the phone for the day or whatever that might look like. Then those people would sometimes bring those toxic behaviors with them. And my team would just step up and say, hey, no, we don't do that here. This place has an amazing workplace culture. And so, yeah, it was just so amazing to see my team just light up, work together, and just actually really stand up for the workplace culture. And I think, it comes back to Bruce Tuckman's research that he did on the 5 stages of team development, because, he says that, when we have new people on our team, we're in that forming phase where we're forming those relationships, we're being respectful, we're being kind, you're putting your best foot forward. Why? Because you want people to like you. Again, this human behavior that we're displaying, and some of it can definitely be fake. But then you move into phase 2, which is your storming phase. And this is really where the pawpaw hits the fan, because, people, then the real person comes out and people butt heads. And what I constantly saw, because I had this positive workplace culture, is that the storming phase lasted a very short amount of time. In comparison to before, when it was a toxic workplace culture, people wouldn't last, because in the storming phase, that's when people resign, because they think that, oh no, what have I come into? This is such a bad workplace, but I'm just going to leave. I'm just not here for it, especially after COVID. And so if we know as leaders that this storming phase exists and that people are going to butt heads in this period, we can actually warn everyone about that, not only our existing team, but new people coming on board as well. They can expect that that's going to happen, and then they can move past it, because past that is the norming phase. And that's kind of when things that are becoming the norm becomes the norm. And then after that is where my team really landed, was the performing phase. They were performing so well together because of this positive workplace culture, because we'd been through that storming phase together. As a whole team, everybody who was left was through that storming phase, and then everybody who came on board as newbies were part of that, and they understood that, you guys are lucky because you just missed the very bad workplace culture. You're stepping into a place that's excellent. And then obviously every single time that somebody had to leave, which is the fifth stage, which is the adjourning phase, that was really sad. Every single time when somebody left to have a baby, or you had someone changing careers for some reason, or you had somebody moving abroad or interstate. That was such a sad, sad, sad day when we left. And I still think about all those people I worked with, and I think about them fondly and dearly because of that culture that we had.
Well, that you built. I mean, you built the culture together from the ground up, really.
Absolutely.
That's extraordinary. Wow. I just love it, Rika. I think what a beautiful thing to bring into the workplace and at home and with our friends, so that we're starting to like lift the vibration of how we act and kind of interact with each other. I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing. So I've got a lot of women in business that maybe, oops, let me start that again. I just clicked my ring on the table. So I have a lot of women in business listening to this podcast. Some of them are working on their own and building their businesses out, and some have a good sized business already. And I guess my question to you is, if someone's setting a business up and they're starting to think about bringing people on board, what's your advice in regard to kicking that culture off from the very start?
Well, my number one piece of advice is that it starts at the interview. So you want to really set the scene at the interview with this person that you are going to onboard, even if it's your very first person that you're onboarding, or if it's your 50th person that you're onboarding. You want to start at the interview. You want to mention to them at the interview, or get them to talk about their experience with workplace culture, understand where they're coming from. And you could even pose questions as to, when it comes to workplace culture, when it comes to gossiping, what are your flaws? Get them to open up and to share about that. And you don't necessarily want them to, it's not about telling you that they are a gossiper or this or that. It's actually not about that. It's about the fact that, see how open they are to talking about workplace culture. And people are very quick to either then badmouth their current workplace or their boss or their colleagues, or they're going to be like, yes, I have experienced this in the past, and so I'm really just looking for a place where, there's going to be positivity, or where I can be my best self without the toxic environment. So just have a look, because their response is really going to tell you where they're at. If this person's already bad-mouthing their workplace or their boss, then red flags. If they're not, if they're saying, things like they just really want to be themselves, they want to feel safe, then those are green flags that you want to look at. The other thing I want to say then, some of the biggest mistakes I see that people make when it comes to onboarding is not taking it seriously, not taking that onboarding process seriously, thinking that it can just be higgledy-piggledy, Humpty Dumpty. No, it cannot. You have to take that onboarding process seriously, because it really sets the scene for what that employee is going to think about your business, or your business. But also it's going to set the scene on how much they respect you. Because as the CEO of your business, they want to know that you've got everything in control. There's nothing worse than coming to work for a boss or for a CEO, for a leader, who looks like they're all over the shop. So even if you fake it till you make it, but you have to make sure that the onboarding process is meticulous and very well thought out. So along with that meticulous and very well thought out, of course, comes your written policies and procedures, or your SOPs, your standard operating procedures. So you have to make sure that whatever is in your brain as the business owner, it comes out on paper. And that is one of the hardest things for a business owner, especially if you're a solopreneur, to put everything that's in your brain on paper. Because some of the procedures and the stuff that you are following, it's just in your brain and you just naturally do them. You haven't even thought about documenting them. You have to go and sit and you have to go and document them. If you struggle documenting your own procedures, what I would suggest is working with someone else. It does not have to be a coach, but it can be just another business owner another person who can ask you questions to say, okay, if you get a new client in, what would you do? If I'm a new client today, what would you do with me? Or if I get somebody who has a question for me on a call, what's the procedure that you follow in your head? So get them to ask you questions, because that's a good way to prompt you, because sometimes we're in our own head and we can't think about these things, but it's good if somebody else prompts us. So get it out all on paper. And then when it comes to being meticulous, so just on that point again, is make sure that you've got a step-by-step roadmap for them when it comes to onboarding. So, the worst onboarding experience of my life is basically going to a couple of days before I started working at this organization. It was scheduled, the onboarding process was scheduled for 2 hours. And so I was like, oh, what's going to happen in these 2 hours? That's very short. How am I going to learn everything? And so when I got there, I was literally given a file of policies and procedures that I had to read through. That was it. And so I was like, oh, I asked the line manager then, I said, is this it? Is there no online training or like anything? She's like, no, that's it. And I said, I said, can you give me a walkthrough of where everything is, just so that I know? Yeah, we don't usually do that. Let me just check my watch. Yeah, sure, I think I can do that. So that's the worst onboarding you could ever do, like giving someone a file of policies and procedures to read through, and then that's it. No verbal, no walkthrough, unless I asked for it, which I then got in the end. But yeah, just please don't do that. Okay. The other thing is just doing verbal and having nothing in writing. Okay. People are not going to remember everything that you say. Yes, some people might be really good verbal auditory listeners, okay, but they're not going to remember everything. So a good mixture of verbal. So you might want to think about pre-recording yourself saying the thing, because you don't want to, maybe you're onboarding 5 new people. You don't want to say the same thing 5 times. You can simply jump on a Zoom and record yourself, or on QuickTime, or on your phone even, really, for that matter. And you can upload it on a Dropbox or on a OneDrive, and they can go click on it and they can go watch it. But it's just so important. It needs to be a mixture of verbal and written. And then the last thing I want to say is that think about, when they need to reference something back, when they've got that question, is really think about, okay, do I need to put together a staff handbook that's going to give them those frequently asked questions, or what am I going to do? Yes, it's okay for them to come and ask you all the questions, but it's going to end up into being a bit of a micromanaging situation, which we absolutely want to avoid. We don't want them to come to you for everything. We want to equip them so that they can work autonomously without you. And so as a business leader, when you've done everything by yourself, yes, it's going to be extremely hard to let go and even let this virtual assistant or this person who's going to be in your office work for you. It's going to be very, very tough. Just realize that as well. But you have to empower them to do their job so that you can do your job. Set the expectations from the beginning and make it clear.
Oh, that is such great advice. Thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this incredible wisdom and lived experience. I think that's the difference. I think the key messages I got from today were definitely setting the expectations with it, whether it be by policy or by values or, protocols or principles in that work environment, and then call everyone into the vision of that and what it could feel like and look like, and then putting things in place to call it out and steer it towards the direction we want to go consistently through everyone in that organisation. And ultimately, always onboarding and interviewing and onboarding with that in mind. I think that's critical. Thank you so much, Rika. What a great share. And tell me, how can people get in contact with you?
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun. So I've got my own show, Women of Faith in Leadership. So people can go and connect with me there, or on LinkedIn. So just under Rika Whelan. I will make sure that I share those links with you to put in the show notes. Otherwise, people can visit my website. It's workplaceculturehub.com, or they can email me support@rikawhelan.com.
That is fantastic. Well, once again, thanks for coming and joining the show. I know for me, when we first talked about gossip in the workplace, it was an incredible eye-opener. And I'm sure today's show has had that sense of wow for everyone to kind of really think about that. And, let's get all the women in business to set that standard, that's how we operate, and that's the kind of safe cultures that we're going to create as women in business. So I just love it. Thank you so much, and chat again soon.
See you there. Bye.
Bye. I hope you loved today's episode and it provides value to you and your business. There are 2 quick things you can do to pay it forward. 1, share this episode with other women you know and love. And 2, take 30 seconds to leave a review on Apple Podcast. This will enable more women in business to receive this valuable information. Let's share the love. Finally, go to quickwinsforbusiness.com, get your free business checklist and join our private Facebook community where I'll be sharing additional quick win tools. Let's work together. Join me here next week with another exciting episode sharing more quick wins for your business. Have a great day.